Well, welcome in everyone. That was kind of a weird glitch there. How's everyone doing today? Nice to see some familiar faces, or I guess familiar names in chat. Hopefully your day is going well so far, and thank you for joining me. Let's see here. Today we're going to talk about, well, first off, my name's Shane. I'll be your kind of presenter for this webinar, and today we're going to talk about hardening Windows 10 clients. The title is Hardening Windows 10 Clients Against Current and Future Attacks, but really we're going to be talking about hardening Windows 10 clients against both known and unknown attacks, wherever they may be. So hardening itself, we're kind of going to take two tracks here. We're going to talk about some basic system hardening that you would do across any operating system. And then we're going to get to some more interesting stuff where we discuss specific features that Microsoft has added to Windows 10 to further mitigate different types of attacks against systems. So without further ado, let's just dive into the deck. We've got a bit to cover today. So first off, we do need to defend not against just the attacks we know about, but also the attacks that we don't know about. And that's kind of the hardest thing to defend against, because if we don't know about it, how can we possibly mitigate it? But one tool that we have for preventing attacks that we might not even be aware of, that we might not even know their existence, is reducing the attack surface of our systems. And that could take different forms, right? It might be disabling unnecessary services. It could be locking down the firewall, removing unnecessary programs. Probably you've seen a few unnecessary services and programs in Windows 10, so we'll take a look at how we can remove those. And then above and beyond that, what's really interesting today is when we get to discussing some of the additional mitigations that Microsoft has added to Windows 10, which we call Exploit Guard. It's kind of a constellation of different tools that you can use to further reduce the ability of people to compromise systems. So this probably goes without saying, but anything that we talk about here, we should probably test it before we actually say make a group policy object, push it out to our entire floor, right? So you don't want to like test this on production, but you should probably have a test system. Make sure that any applications that your employees rely on aren't broken by any of the configurations that we talk about here. But that said, if we are testing and kind of deploying it in a staged, methodical manner, a lot of these configurations can be really big security wins. So to dive into today's topics, what we're going to talk about, I'm kind of standing in front of Exploit Guard. I'll get out of the way of that in a moment. We're going to talk about how we can pare down Windows 10. Let me make sure I can write here. Because it comes with so many services and applications and features that we just don't need, and there's pretty easy ways to get rid of them in an automated manner using PowerShell. We'll talk about a few different configuration changes we might make for Windows Firewall and locking that down, because there are certain default rules that we really don't need. And then we're going to talk about this family of configurations that we call Exploit Guard, which kind of has four subgroups. It's kind of a constellation of configurations that prevent different types of attack. So we have attack surface reduction, which is kind of a system-wide number of rules that you can enable to reduce the attack surface to kind of minimize certain avenues of attack that are commonly used against Windows systems. We've got controlled folder access, which is kind of like a bouncer for the file system. It's going to prevent certain processes that are untrusted from accessing, by default, user directories. So documents, desktop, downloads, all those directories. We can say, if we don't know you, if we don't recognize you as a process, you aren't allowed to access or modify any of the contents of those user files. So what do you suppose that's a good mitigation against? Is the built-in security of Windows 10 good enough for a business environment? I would say you can really lock it down if you put in the time with actually hardening it, removing everything. But if we're talking about the default Windows 10 configuration, it's pretty insecure. What I'd recommend is both paring down Windows 10, configuring it to be hardened, to have a really secure baseline, and then bringing in additional layers of security in with it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and Log4j or Log4 shell is a really interesting exploit. Unfortunately, we don't have time to talk about that today, but that's a really interesting one, kind of a major one. So to go back to what I was talking about, controlled folder access, that is going to be a really nice mitigation against ransomware. And we'll kind of demonstrate that using a little kind of fake ransomware program that Microsoft provides. And we've also got exploit protection, which is another set of rules. It's kind of similar to attack surface reduction, but this is something you can define, you can enable on a system-wide level, or you can enable it for individual executables. So you can kind of define exactly what a particular process or executable is allowed to do. And we'll demonstrate how that can be beneficial. So exploit guard, just to give you the kind of quick hierarchy of what that is, it's really these four different groups of security configurations that we can tweak in Windows 10. So we got attack surface reduction, we got exploit protection, controlled folder access, which is really useful for kind of preventing ransomware primarily, but it could also prevent like an attacker from deleting a bunch of files. And we've got network protection, which is sort of the fourth one that we aren't going to have time to talk about today, but I will be providing plenty of documentation, links essentially to the good Microsoft documentation if you want to read more about any of these subcategories of exploit guard. And that kind of brings me to my first link here. Really quickly, we are going to, let me post this in chat. This is, you can find this if you're watching this on demand through any search engine, but Microsoft kind of introduced in this blog post dated 2017, so it's been around a while, exploit guard, and they've got more in-depth explanations for each of these features, and we'll be demonstrating 3 of them today, with the exception of network protection. And I'm just going to post this in chat for those of you that are watching live. And again, this is relatively easy to find with a quick search on Google or Bing or something. So I just want to provide that right away because we definitely don't have time to go into full detail on a lot of these different tools. So what are some management options for really any of these configurations, whether we're talking about disabling services, turning on attack surface reduction, modifying Windows Defender Firewall? Well, there's lots of management options, right? We could just do a manual configuration through the graphical user interface. That's always an option, at least with most settings in Windows, but it's not super scalable. And even if you're just working on a single system and just for testing purposes, it can still be slow because then you have to poke around the settings app. And is anyone here a big fan of the settings app? I personally can't say that I am. It's always difficult to navigate. So it's really my preference and what I'll be focusing in on today to use PowerShell where I can. So PowerShell, this is something we can use to script, to automate configurations. But even that's not really going to make sense in larger environments. So obviously with Microsoft, we've got things like group policy we can use for basically all of these configurations. Endpoint configuration manager, Intune. There's all kinds of different ways that we can configure the systems. For today, we're going to focus more on the PowerShell commandlets that we have just built into Windows. But you can basically translate these to any of these other management strategies. And where appropriate, we'll include the path within Group Policy Management Console in case you wanted to just define a group policy. So Windows comes with a lot of extra stuff, right? Does anyone have any favorite bloatware that comes with Windows 10? Oh boy, I've got some. Let's see. On Windows 10 Pro, you can get such business critical applications as, yeah, Solitaire, like Candy Crush, Soda Saga, Windows. Well, they kind of like try to sell you Office. What else do we have here? Minecraft, some Xbox services and Xbox applications. Right, there's so much stuff that comes with Windows and it's not really going to be useful. So just getting rid of that can reduce the overall attack surface of the system because the less code we have running, the less software we have installed, really the less there is for an attacker to try to exploit. So yeah, we've got lots of Xbox, Cortana, absolutely, lots of things that we don't need. So if you want to use PowerShell to get rid of these, there's kind of these commandlets that are nice. They're kind of, it's not like Linux, you know, they kind of make sense, they're intuitive. So if you wanted to like get a list of services, you can say get service. If you want to get a list of those applications that come pre-installed like Candy Crush, Soda Saga, you can use the get apex package command or the get apex provision package command. Same goes for features. So we're going to demonstrate this. Don't worry. I'm not just going to throw this at you and then move on to the next slide. But having gotten them, you can then use other PowerShell commands to either disable the service. So you can set, provide a particular name and say, hey, I want to disable this service. Or in the case of Apex packages or Apex provision packages, you can just remove them. So the difference between those two is an Apex package is something that's kind of already installed for your users that you have on a system. So you can use Apex package to remove those packages for users that have already made profiles on a given system. Apex provision package, if you remove that, it's going to prevent a package from being provisioned for any future users that might log into a system. So in practice, you kind of want to use both. But let's take a look at this really quickly and just demonstrate how you might use PowerShell in this case to just get rid of some of the extra stuff. And then I'm going to share a link with you in case you want some inspiration, if you wanted to script this and be a little bit more automated about it. So let me kind of move over to the right side here. Yeah, absolutely. So Nick says, it seems like Microsoft changes the package names every single upgrade. I almost feel like they do that on purpose. It is kind of an annoyance, I'll grant you that. Yeah, and it looks like we've got some agreement in there. So let's just, let's do services, right? So we could say get service, but this is going to list out a bunch of information, probably more information than we need. So if you wanted to like filter this down and just get a list of just the names, for instance, you could say get service, and then you could pipe it in to select object, name, and that's just going to print out a list of names. So these are all the services that are on the system. It doesn't really give us information about whether they're enabled or disabled, but there's a lot of services here that we probably don't want to be enabled. So what are some great services that we don't need? How about these 4 Xbox services? Do we use that a lot in production? Hopefully not. Hopefully your users aren't using that. And I mean, the list goes on. There's plenty of things for me to pick on here. But if you want to disable a particular service, you could just say, well, set service. We can specify the name. Which one should we pick on here? Let's pick on the Net API service. See if we can disable that. Say, all right, Xbox Net API service, startup type, disabled. And there we go. We magically disabled that instead of it being set to manual, I think is the default. And you can do this for a lot of different services that are just not necessary. And the fewer services you have enabled or running, the lower the attack surface of your system. In the same way, we can kind of remove some unnecessary packages that come installed. So we could say get apex package, and let's actually do this select object thing again. We'll pipe it into that, and we'll just get a name of packages and see all the wonderful stuff that comes packaged with Windows 10 Pro. And I have to actually type out the full command. That's generally helpful, just as a pro tip. So what do we have? We got Zune. Anyone using Zoom? What else do we have? Feedback Hub, Windows Photos, Zune Video. All these packages that are just completely unnecessary. So you can remove those. And what I would usually do, and this is how I would do it, you could say get apex package. You can specify the name. Which one should we pick on here? Let's say Zune Music. I hear the Zunes were actually pretty good, but let's pick on that. Make sure I type this correctly. And what you can do is just feed that into remove apex package, if it will auto-complete for you properly. And there you go, that's gonna remove it. So that's not super, doing it this way is not really scalable though, right? Usually what you'd want to do is incorporate this into a script. You define like a list of all these different names and tell the script to just iterate over them, removing the packages, right? Similar thing for get Windows optional features. You might, for instance, use that to disable SMB, but I'll kind of leave the listing out and the choosing of which services and applications you want to disable or remove to you. What I do want to provide is just a little bit of inspiration. There's lots of PowerShell scripts up on GitHub that you can use maybe as a baseline for scripts that you would then use to harden your Windows 10 operating system. I miss my Zune, and it's, let's see, I miss Zune, create a startup script for every new machine, not a bad idea. Potentially, yeah. Or, you know, you might be able to, yeah, that might be one way to get rid of these applications, definitely. All right. All right, some good messages in chat. So if you want just a little bit of inspiration, there is this debloat Windows 10 repository here. And it's got a number of scripts that do the things that we just kind of discussed. So for instance, if we go to scripts, we could go to like disable services, and it's got like a bunch of semi-unnecessary services. Obviously, you have to make it make sense for your environment. You want to disable a service that you rely on, but this is like the general way that you might iterate through a list of services to disable them. So I'm going to really quickly post this in chat. And again, you can find these all if you're watching this on demand through your favorite search engine. And let me paste that in for a little bit of inspiration. And that'll help you get rid of whatever services and applications you don't want. Yeah, so yeah, you can, Justin says you can disable some of that within OSD Cloud 2 as part of your base image. All kinds of different ways to do it, absolutely. I'm kind of PowerShell oriented, but I don't want to discount any other way that you can accomplish this. And they might even be more scalable than using PowerShell scripts. All right, beyond that, another really important part of just hardening a system is paying attention to the firewall. It turns out that just like we've got lots of unnecessary services and applications on Windows 10, we've got lots of firewall allowances. So for instance, Cortana is allowed inbound and outbound by default. Microsoft Photos is. 3D Viewer, it's allowed outbound. Sticky Notes is allowed inbound and outbound. And if you're going to remove these packages, you might as well remove the firewall rules. So it's pretty straightforward to do through PowerShell. And we could just demonstrate that really quickly. But the one thing I want to point out, these are the two commands you might use to either disable a rule or disable a group of rules, like a family of rules. But also right here, hopefully it's coming through on the stream, but you can use the set net firewall profile commandlet. And what that'll do is change the behavior for a given firewall profile. So as everyone, when you connect to a network, you've seen the pop-up where it asks you if this is a public network or a private network. That's really what a profile is with Windows Defender Firewall. It's just, depending on the type of network you're connected to, Windows Defender Firewall will apply a different set of rules. So what this does here, this rule, is it's going to change the default behavior so that it will log blocked packets, because by default, we don't log any packets that are dropped by Windows Defender Firewall. And it also increases the log size. I'm kind of getting way over to the edge here, but it also increases the size of the log file. And the reason you might want to log blocked packets is, especially when we're talking about hosts that are on our local area networks that are usually on this side of NAT, we shouldn't be expecting a lot of blocked packets. We shouldn't be expecting a lot of unexpected traffic. And if we start seeing that, it's good to be able to detect it, because that might be an indicator that there's some sort of attack going on. Now, on a public-facing server, it might not make as much sense because you kind of have the internet background radiation of just constant attacks and scans going on. Well, let's take a look at this really quickly. We're going to pick on Cortana. And, this is sort of the slide for anyone that is referring to the slides later, but we'll just pick on Cortana here directly. So let's move over to the PowerPoint machine. I'm going to open up Windows Defender. That's not PowerPoint, it's the demo machine. Let's see, firewall here. And let me see, it looks like it's coming through. It's readable, right? All right, so let's go to advanced settings. I just want to show you it takes a while to populate, but if you just kind of go down to Cortana here, notice that we've got Cortana. This is enabled in the inbound direction. Same goes in the outbound direction once it populates. So we've got Cortana here. If you wanted to disable both of those, instead of maybe disabling something by a name, you can also disable it by the group here. And that's going to disable an entire constellation of related firewall rules that are maybe there to allow a particular service in or out, or both. So if you want to get rid of Cortana, well, it's as simple as, I'm going to clear the screen here so you can see, disable, tab completion isn't my friend today. Net firewall rule, better add an F. And you can say display group. Cortana, right? And this is going to disable any rules that are part of that Cortana group. And then, okay, it might take a while, but once it's done thinking, here we've got it enabled. If we refresh, then it's going to be disabled. And as you can see here, all right, so we managed to disable a group of rules that specifically allows Cortana. Nothing too crazy and wild there. The other one that I want to show you, though, is how you can enable specifically logging of block packets. So currently we are on what profile? Well, actually, we don't even really need to know the profile. I just want to show you how to apply this to start logging packets. So if you want to do that, just set net firewall rule. You got to be pretty specific when you're using tab completion, because net firewall profile, because there's a lot of different commandlets. So set net firewall profile. We specify the profile name. Yes, we're on public, right? We could also say domain or something. And log blocked. So we can specify we want to log blocked packets, true. And then you can also specify a log file size if you'd like to. Log max size. Interesting, so there's kilobytes. All right. And we could say that's 16,384 or something like that. And that's just going to actually start logging blocked packets, which is really useful for auditing purposes, right? And you can do this through the graphical user interface too, but it's just a little bit more direct to do it through PowerShell. So that's where I tend to prefer things. And then you could always put it into a script and start applying all these things automatically, as opposed to constantly poking around in the user interface of Windows, which is always changing. All right, so that's getting rid of unnecessary, essentially cruft on Windows 10. And a few things that you can do with the firewall, like finding and disabling unnecessary rules. Obviously, we should test these things to make sure that we're not blocking anything important. Where it gets really interesting, though, is with these exploit guard configurations that we can make. That's where it gets really fun. I'm actually going to close out of firewall here, and let's jump over to the PowerPoint slide. So exploit guard, like we said, it's a whole constellation of different configurations that we can make. The first one we're going to discuss is attack surface reduction, or ASR. And these are just rules you can enable on your system to block common avenues of attack, common things that malicious actors might use to exploit a Windows 10 system. So for instance, we can block credential stealing from LSAS. That actually, if you do a dump of the RAM contents of LSAS, you can extract some really useful information as an attacker. It could be hashes of credentials, other credential information, secrets, and so forth. So you can actually just block that outright. And that's the one we're going to demonstrate momentarily, how we can block anyone from dumping the contents of LSAS and then getting some sort of credentials or secrets from it. But beyond that, we can block executable content. We can block Office applications from making executables, which, I don't know, has anyone ever seen a use case for an Office application actually creating an executable? Maybe you have, but it doesn't seem super common. It seems like something that's better for an attacker than for your typical user, right? Yeah, so Delta Sierra is not a legit one. So you can block that, and the list goes on. We can block API calls. I think another one is you can block Adobe Reader from creating child processes. There's a lot of different attack surface reduction rules that you can enable. And you can always do this through group policy too. These are kind of here for anyone that wants to know what the corresponding group policy location is for configuring these. But what we're going to do is demonstrate this first rule here, how we can block credential stealing from LSAS. And there's one more thing I want to point out after we do that. How can you actually audit these? How can you find in Event Viewer any events that correspond to this being triggered? So say you're auditing as opposed to outright enabling something because you want to test. There's actually some pre-made filters that Microsoft provides that you can just copy and paste into Event Viewer for the purposes of auditing these different security controls. So with all that said, let's take a look at this. So this is what we're going to do. We are going to turn on this attack surface reduction rule. It's kind of annoying with PowerShell because you have to specify this globally unique identifier here, which you have to get from Microsoft documentation. So it's not the most user-friendly, but as long as you can copy and paste from Microsoft documentation, it's not too complex. And we're going to demonstrate that you can't dump the contents of LSAS once we've enabled this rule. So let's jump over really quickly and I'll kind of prove this to you, why this rule is beneficial. Let's do this. Let's go to Task Manager and let's create a dump of the local security authority process. So we'll just say, just in Task Manager, create a dump file, and it's going to create it. And notice that we can now open it, and it's 46 megabytes roughly. So this has dumped the full RAM contents of this process, and then we might use another tool to go and extract credentials from it. If you turn on this rule, and I actually have to copy and paste that huge globally unique identifier, so bear with me, then we can block anything from being dumped from RAM. So let's see here. This is the one that I want. So I'm going to post this in chat. This has descriptions of all the attack surface reduction rules. Again, it's just on Microsoft documentation. I'm just going to search here for LSAS. We want to find this globally unique identifier here. This is for the rule. It's going to copy that. Again, not the most user-friendly, but you only have to do it once if you're writing a script. And we'll go back in here, and let's go into PowerShell. Let's say, all right, set NP preference, attack surface, and then we'll do tab completion, reduction, rule IDs. I press Control C instead of Control V. Let's try that again. That's the joy of doing these things live. All right, not. All right, let me try this again. Control V. All right, so we specify the identifier, and then we can specify an action. And in this case, we're just going to enable it. But if you wanted to audit it to see what it would do instead of actually enforcing, you can do that as well. And after we demonstrate this, then I'll show you how you can make these nice filters that are provided by Microsoft to audit these different configurations. So now it's enabled. All right, so it's enabled. And theoretically, if we now create a dump of that process, we shouldn't get any data out of it. So hopefully I'm not lying. It is a live demonstration, so Windows does tend to fight back occasionally. Let's see here. Local security authority process. Let's create the dump file. And notice how like nothing happens. It tries to create the dump file, but it doesn't let you actually browse to it. So notice how we've got this dump file here, and it might be a little bit on the small side. But this latest dump file, number 2, has 0 kilobytes. So we were essentially restricting access to the contents of that process, and that's going to mitigate different types of credential stealing attacks on a Windows system. And that's just one of many different attack surface reduction rules that you can enable. So definitely check out the documentation. It's pretty cool. It might prevent things like Mimikatz, for instance. Although that might have some workarounds built in already, I'm not sure. All right, so let's quickly show you how you can audit these things. For all these exploit guard demonstrations that we're doing, really you don't want to just enable them and start deploying them to users. You want to test them, you want to audit them. So what Microsoft provides are these nice XML filters for all the different exploit guard categories. So we can look at attack surface reduction rules, controlled folder access events, exploit protection events, network protection events, the 4 kind of categories within exploit guard. They've already made these XML rules for you. So if I want to make a particular view for network protection events, I can just copy this, go back over to RDP, and within Event Viewer, notice that I've already made some views here. You can just right-click on Custom Views, click Create Custom View, and just paste it in as XML. And it doesn't allow you to right-click there, so you have to Control V. And then that will make this nice view, and this would be network protection events. So it's not that complicated to get this set up, and then you can actually audit these things without having to poke around in every nook and cranny of Event Viewer, which would take forever. So network protection events. Cool. All right. Let's see here. So that's how you can audit these things. And we've demonstrated that that LSASS works. Let me catch up on chat because I've been seeing it kind of scroll by. Okay, so we had will this be available for download? Yeah, I don't think it's download, but you should be able to stream it and access it later. And yeah, thank you, Colin, for answering there, and Dan, for that matter. All right, yeah, longer form. You can really go in detail with this. It's really fun, huh? All right, so that's attack surface reduction. Let's move on to really just another category within exploit guard, which is exploit protection. So the main difference, it's kind of similar in a way to attack surface reduction, but with exploit protection, we can apply this to the system or to individual executables. So we can kind of tailor our mitigations depending on what an executable should or should not do. So some things you can do with exploit protection, and again, this might be system-wide or on just a single binary. You can block untrusted fonts or block non-system fonts, because it turns out fonts are a pretty common way for people to attack Windows systems, like malicious fonts. So if you just block any fonts that aren't built in, that's a pretty good mitigation in and of itself. We can disable extension points, which will prevent types of DLL injection. We can disallow an executable from creating child processes. We can have mandatory ASLR, address space layout randomization, which is going to prevent buffer overflows from really being feasible to exploit from an attacker's point of view. And again, the list goes on and on and on. So what we'll do is pick on Internet Explorer. So what we'll do, actually, yeah, we'll block untrusted fonts, and we're going to apply that rule to Internet Explorer and just demonstrate that really quickly. Poor Internet Explorer. Hopefully we aren't using it, but just in the event that someone accidentally opens it up, it's good to apply mitigations to it. So well, let's show you this really quickly. This is the command we're going to run. The PowerShell command is set process mitigation. Then you can provide a path to the executable that you want to apply mitigations to. And then you should use this enable flag, and you can give it a comma-separated list of all the different mitigations you want to apply. And there's dozens of them that you could apply, but it's probably going to break things. So you have to be you have to test these things before you apply them. Now let's put this in action here. We'll say set process mitigation, name, and you have to provide, in this case, we're providing the full path to Internet Explorer, program files, Internet Explorer, iExplorer, right? This is the full path. And then we can enable, specifically, we're going to enable the disabling of non-system fonts. So we're essentially saying don't use fonts that aren't built into the system. So it's kind of, not the most elegant way of phrasing it, but we're enabling the disablement of non-system fonts. And if we press enter, all right, we've applied this process mitigation to Internet Explorer. Now, if we were to go open it up and try to browse around, more likely than not, we're going to start blocking non-system fonts from being loaded. So let's see if Windows will even let me open Internet Explorer, because it tries to shuffle you off to Edge a lot these days. Let's see. We'll open it up. Let's go to, let's just search for something, Windows. See here. All right, so we've made a search. I'm sure that's enough for us to maybe get some non-system fonts attempted to be loaded. So let's go back to our event viewer. And if we go to exploit protection events, I'm expecting to see here, let's see, well, we got some stuff. It's kind of all smashed together here. Yeah, ooh, I don't know what happened with event viewer. It's really smashed things together. So yeah, it looks like we've actually got a few hits on some other things. These might be default configurations. You're also going to get in here these blocks for Internet Explorer, right? Because we've blocked fonts that are not built into the system. And that's going to prevent that single avenue of attack. And there's plenty of other mitigations you can apply on a process-by-process basis. So I believe, yes, I do. I've got a description here of all the different mitigations you can apply. Again, testing is going to be really important because certain applications might rely on maybe given API calls or other functionality, and if you disable it, it might break it. So it requires a little bit of testing when you're tailoring this to a given application. But I'll post this in chat really quickly. And the last one I want to show you in the exploit guard family for today is controlled folder access. So ransomware is a really big concern these days. Has anyone gotten hit by ransomware? It's not good. So what controlled folder access is, it's Microsoft's kind of response to that to make it more difficult for ransomware to function effectively. So with controlled folder access, when you enable it, by default, it's going to control access to user directories. Again, downloads, desktop, documents, pictures, all those user directories. And then only processes that the operating system knows and is kind of familiar with are allowed to then access those directories and modify the contents of them. You can actually add additional trusted processes in case it doesn't recognize an application that you want to use. And you can add additional folders that you want to control access to. And we're going to demonstrate this really quickly with, it's kind of fake ransomware from Microsoft. And I'll give you the link in case you want to. You have to sign in with your Microsoft account, but if you want to try this out yourself, it's kind of fun. So what we'll do, and this is the kind of rundown of what we're going to do. We're first going to run this ransomware, and it should basically encrypt this directory on the VM that we're using. And then if we enable controlled folder access, it will prevent this untrusted, unsigned process from encrypting it, once we actually enable things. So let's see if it works. Oh, we got some good discussion about different browsers. Oh, I wish I could, yeah. Well, let's keep on track. I'll have to keep on track. All right, so let me jump over here. All right, it's gonna clean up the demo environment. All right, so what we've made is here on C, we've got this demo folder. and it's got a test file. So it's nothing crazy. It's just a text file with some random letters in it. And what we're going to do is run this fake ransomware from Microsoft. And if the, if hopefully with luck, it's going to, well, actually without luck, it's going to encrypt our files. So what it did, again, this is sort of fake ransomware. It went to that C demo directory and it encrypted those files. And again, if we go over here, notice how our file is now encrypted. So it kind of mimics behavior of ransomware. What we can do though, is with controlled folder access, we can say, no, if we don't know you, then you're not allowed to touch this directory. And that's what we'll do. The first thing I have to do is just get rid of this encrypted stuff and like the threatening HTML page and make a new one. So delete that and we'll make a text file. We'll just call this test file. And we'll put some text in it. 1, 2, 3. All right, good enough. So now if we actually enable controlled folder access and we enable it for this folder, it should block it now. That's the behavior that we're expecting. So going back over to PowerShell, again, we're going to use the set MP preference command. That's really common for all these configurations. Enable controlled folder access. We just want to enable it. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Now controlled folder access is enabled, but only for the default folders, only for the user folders. Now, if we actually do this one more time, and we point it to that C/demo directory that we want to protect, I believe that's controlled folder access protected folders. We could say, all right, C/demo. And hopefully I got the syntax right there. Looks like it. All right, so now we've said enable controlled folder access and also protect this folder. Now, this ransomware, this sort of fake ransomware from Microsoft is going to try to encrypt that. And if everything's working properly and the demo gods are smiling on me, this will actually prevent it and we'll get a pop-up instead. So drum roll, please. It's the moment of truth. And I am going to show it to you. I just pressed the wrong button. Let's run this. Gonna wait a moment. Is it going to? Yay, it blocked it. There you go. The demonstration worked. And it would work for any user directories by default too, right? It's just gonna block access unless that process's name is on the list, essentially. It's kind of a bouncer for the operating system. And a lot of ransomware isn't going to be able to get around that. It can break some things, so you definitely, again, want to test. I've even seen control folder access block like built-in Windows services. So occasionally you have to allow them manually, but with a little bit of testing and configuration, you can really lock down, especially user files on their computers and protect them from ransomware. Let's see. Oh, wow. Can you protect Windows 2016 shares using this process? That's a great question, Jay. Yeah, so I'm wondering if you have a share and it's mapped, I might actually have to test that to see how consistently it works. But it stands to reason that, yeah, if you have a map share on a device and ransomware is then run on it, executed on it, it might not be able to access that share if you have controlled folder access enabled on that device for that share. But I actually have to test that. That's a really good question. Yeah, so you can lock down basically any path here. So as long as you provided a path, you can lock down it could be like a directory, it might even be a full drive, but you can lock it down. The other thing I want to point out is you can also allow certain processes because you might be using some sort of third-party application that Windows doesn't recognize. So that's another thing you can do. Let's see here. I want to say it's set MP preference. Oh, I got to tab through. Not enable. Oh, it's one of these. It's in here. I think it's controlled. Yeah, I think it's this one. Yeah, controlled folder access allowed application. So you can also say this application is allowed. Yeah, so will it protect network folders from Shane? I need to test that one. I believe it will as long as you've got it configured on the device that has a network folder mapped. That is the behavior that I would expect. All right, let's see. Any other questions in chat? I'm gonna jump back over. So we kind of talked about, this is kind of a wide-ranging webinar today, right? So we talked about some of the basic common operating system level hardening steps that you'd take, and that would be just reducing the number of services or applications that might be running or installed, even maybe locking down the firewall, enabling logging on the firewall. And we also talked about some of those proactive steps that we can take with Windows specifically, all these different mitigations that you can enable. And if you check out the documentation, I mean, we just touched the very tip of the iceberg. There's tons of different mitigations that we can enable and we can tune for our users in our environments. And in doing so, we're just incrementally reducing the avenues of attack that nefarious actors might be able to take. And the benefit there is that this forms a really solid foundation for any further security measures that we might use. So you can always go to a third-party vendor and pay a bunch of money, pay out the nose for the latest security agent or security solution. But if your Windows 10, your client operating systems are kind of inherently insecure and poorly configured, if they're using default configurations, there's only so much that the fancy new security vendor can do for you. But if you've got a really good baseline, if you have a solid foundation through your configuration of Windows 10, then that is complementary to any additional security controls that you might implement. So that is that's sort of my justification for the things that we talked about here. Now there are plenty of expanded sources, expanded information like PDFs that you can get for hardening Windows 10 systems. And I will link these in chat. Let's see here. One of them is Center for Internet Security. They've got their CIS benchmarks for Windows 10. And that is an exhaustive document with all kinds of registry configurations that you might look into if you really want to lock down your system to the best of your ability. It's extensive. I'm just going to put it that way. I'm going to post that in chat. Unfortunately, you do have to provide them with your email address, but once you do that, you kind of are able to download any of their benchmarks. So it's just a one-time thing. And there's also LifeVars. This is just another organization that posted a relatively, I thought, a pretty well thought out PDF here. And let me kind of actually show you what we're looking at. This is just another PDF for Windows 10 hardening. And this one is freely available in case you didn't want to provide your email address to CIS, although I definitely recommend it. Yeah, that's a great point. So Shane says, Shane, so I'm not just agreeing with you because we have the same name. All client-to-client communication should be blocked. Yeah, and you might block that either through Windows Firewall, like you say, or you might block it through other mechanisms like you could have like private VLANs. But yeah, in a sense, the more you can restrict client-to-client communication, the better, because there's no real reason in most environments why one client should be communicating directly to another, huh? So the more you can restrict that and basically just allow clients to communicate with servers and maybe the internet, but not each other, the lesser the chance of someone successfully moving laterally. So that's a great point. All right, so it looks like I don't think I've missed any questions in chat. I may have, and if I have, I apologize. I'd have to actually, great minds think alike. So Justin asks, how do these compare to the Microsoft security baselines? I'd have to actually do like a compare and contrast personally. Off the top of my head, I don't know. I usually defer to the CIS benchmarks. I'm not as familiar with the Microsoft benchmarks. I imagine that they have a lot in common, but I can't say that definitively. Great names think alike. Good call, Other Shane. All right, I'm gonna keep an eye on chat, but let's conclude here. Oh, first off, thank you for joining me for this kind of whirlwind tour of options. And this is really just a basic demonstration of some of these tools within the Exploit Guard umbrella. There's a lot more mitigations that you can apply, a lot more rules that you can apply. And with proper testing, you can really lock down your systems and form a really strong foundation for your Windows 10 clients. So you probably already know who Stormwind is, but in case you were wondering, in case you just wandered here, we are a training company. We've got over 180 classes, virtual instructor-led. I'm one of the instructors. And it's not just an instructor talking at you the whole time. There's lots of additional things that our classes come with, right? So it could be labs, practice exams, study resources. It's not purely me talking at you or some other instructor talking at you. We give you all the resources you need to study and be successful for certification exams or for just learning a particular technology. So if you're interested in Stormwind, this is the person you can reach out to. If you want to reach out really with any questions, comments, feedback, you can reach out, kind of said that 3 times, to Mike Fajan. And here is his email address. Hopefully that's coming through, but it's just mike.fajan@stormwindlive.com. And his phone number is also there. And perfect. Thank you for chatting that in, Colin. Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much, Mark, for reminding me, because I had that link, I had that tab open and I wanted to share it with you. Perfect. I'm so glad that you mentioned that. So Mark in chat asked about where you get that ransomware test file. And this is it. I almost completely overlooked it, so you saved me. Here you go. So this is actually demo.wd.microsoft.com. And here you can download actually a lot of different test files for Windows Defender. So we've got this ransomware. This is the one that we demonstrated for controlled folder access. We've got also sample files for different attack surface reduction rules, exploit protection rules, and the list kind of goes on from there. So I'll post this in chat, but it is demo.wd.microsoft.com, and they've got lots of interesting ways to test these. The one thing I'd mention is that expect it to be a little bit frustrating, because more often than not, Windows Defender is going to block you when you try to download these. So you have to manually apply exceptions and maybe even multiple rounds of exceptions before you can actually run them to test something out. So it can be a little bit on the tedious side, but it's still really cool. So thank you for asking that, Mark. I appreciate the reminder. All right, everyone. Well, that's all I got for today. I'll continue to monitor chat for questions, but thanks all for joining me on a Friday to do a little exploration of Windows 10 security. I really appreciate it. Awesome participation in chat. Really good comments, really great questions. And I hope you all have a great weekend. Thank you again for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.